How's it going?
All right, good to see you,
Good
buddy.
to see you. So people are really joining us. Thanks so much for being here, Rich. So
No, thanks for having me. This is
yeah,
this
of
is
course.
great, and happy to get a chance to catch up with you and talk to you. Excited to talk about rhinoplasty,
Yeah.
but first, always just want to check in to see how you're doing. What are you doing these days?
Yeah, so good question. Not much surgery, that's for sure. So I still have my stint at the Brooklyn VA, and I'm actually in talks with them about possibly doing a couple of trachs on a few patients that have COVID. Actually, by now, most of them have tested negative after first testing positive, since they've been intubated for weeks. So there's a chance that I might be getting to do some of those procedures, which, as you know, carry a lot of risk, and we're just evaluating patient by patient to see, who actually needs it. So other than that, it's just been a lot of planning for the reopening
Sure.
and that sort of thing. So how are you?
Staying busy. Surprisingly, it's been incredibly busy. Just like looking at different ways to expand the practice right now. I'm doing nonstop virtual consultations, pretty much 7A to 7P, 6 days a week, including
Wow.
Saturdays. So it's been pretty crazy busy.
I started this thing called Face Facts, just kind of made it up. I wanted to just, have like just honest conversations with people who I, like and respect in the community here, but also, globally. And just to highlight relevant topics for facial plastics, for hair restoration, and some other related topics that people just may not always get this kind of candid, kind of information. It's hard for them to get it in other ways. You go to a website, it's just everyone marketing themselves. They don't have access to, the literature that we do. So I think it's in the conferences, right? Our patients look for
Yeah,
them. So
yeah, that's
nice.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love this style of forum for just giving non-BS answers to stuff. Really giving just brutally honest answers to patients because I know that that's what they want to hear. You get caught up so much in just sort of stuff that's not really reality, and people trying to market stuff. And so I'm
Yeah.
happy that we're able to just have this
No, this is
conversation
awesome, and
today.
it's a nice opportunity. I know we're itching to get back into doing some of these procedures,
Yeah.
but it's a good kind of other option. So some of my followers who may not know you, Rich, I just wanted to introduce you a little bit here. So, Dr. Richard Reisch, so he's in New York City and on Long Island, really one of the best plastic surgeons, I think, in the country right now, honestly. Just amazed by your results. I'm constantly following you on this platform, but just kind of talking to you informally about things. Just really impressed by your approach to things, the quality of work that you do, and I think you have more reviews online than just about anyone else, in the 5-star category, and that really just says something. I mean, it's not by chance. What you're doing is incredible. The way you treat people, I really look up to that. So just want people to understand, kind of more about that. And you do the full breadth of plastic surgery, cosmetic, reconstructive, right? So it's pretty incredible training that you've had, and you're able to apply all those skills in your practice. So if you want to add anything to that.
Well, no, thanks, Gary. And the feeling is definitely mutual towards you, my friend. And
Thanks.
one thing I always say, just in regards to patient reviews and whatnot, if you're good to patients, they will pay it back to you 10 times full. It's just being there for people, helping them. Even something so simple as touching base with them on a Saturday morning, after you operate on them that week, it goes such a long way. And I think patients really appreciate that and will go the extra mile for you as well.
When I came into the city about 2 years ago, you were definitely one of the only surgeons who welcomed me with the open arms, and I really appreciate that. So
Okay, well, I'm
it
happy to
definitely
hear that.
didn't come from everyone, but yeah, you were definitely one of the few. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. So my sincere pleasure. So I think we're going to talk some about rhinoplasty because I know a lot of people on here want to hear a lot of stuff, and so we were talking a little bit before, and I know I got a lot of people asking me some questions about it, and so
I mean, I think to kick it off, I think patients come in asking sometimes for non-surgical rhinoplasty, and sometimes the terminology is confusing to folks, like. They think it's maybe liquid rhinoplasty, or, is that the same thing? Is it, what materials are used? And then, of course, the number one thing is candidacy. Like, I find that people call up asking, like, do you do this procedure? And I say, well, yeah, for the right person, and so I think determining who's a candidate, I think it's different for different providers. I think people who, like you and I, who actually do rhinoplasty surgery, we have maybe a different approach to it compared to some, doctors or nurses who may not ever operate on the nose. Kind of start things off. I mean, what's your kind of approach to people asking that question about can they use filler in the nose?
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a lot of good points right there. I do non-surgical rhinoplasty in my practice, not nearly as frequently as I do surgical rhinoplasty. So anytime a patient comes into my office for a consult for a non-surgical rhinoplasty, the very first thing I ask myself is, are they a good candidate? Because if they're not a good candidate for that, I'm going to offer them a surgical rhinoplasty, which happens probably 99% of the time. And I think that's a true distinction between what we do versus what happens, unfortunately, sometimes when people go in to see a practitioner who maybe isn't as comfortable doing rhinoplasty or doesn't have that capability of doing a surgical rhinoplasty. If a patient comes in and they want a non-surgical rhinoplasty, guess what? They're getting a non-surgical rhinoplasty pretty much no matter what. Yeah. So it all comes down to trying to teach both patients and practitioners who is a good candidate for a non-surgical rhinoplasty. And in my opinion, the only patients who should ever be considered for a non-surgical rhinoplasty have a low set radix. That means their radix, which is this area up here for everyone listening, is pretty low set, and they have an under-projected tip. Okay, because the two areas that you're going to inject for non-surgical rhinoplasty are the radix and the tip to try to disguise a dorsal hump. Now, I don't know about you, but what I far more often see in my practice are patients coming in either wanting or having already had non-surgical rhinoplasty, and they have a relatively large dorsal hump and a high set radix.
Yes.
And sometimes even an over-projecting tip. And so if you go into a practitioner that doesn't do rhinoplasty or isn't good at it, they're going to end up doing fillers on the patient. Yeah. And you're going to end up with a massive radix that just blends straight into the forehead and goes right down to the nose.
The Roman nose.
The Roman nose, or the Avatar nose.
Yeah.
From the movie Avatar, where it just completely obliterates the frontal nasal junction and really looks quite ridiculous. And what's even more concerning to me, Gary, is that I'll see people's Instagrams, mostly practitioners' Instagrams, where they will intentionally disguise that avatar look in the after photo by either having the patient in a profile view turn their head slightly more in the after shot to try to disguise that obliteration. They'll get clever and they'll only show the nose, and then they'll show different degrees of covering the nose to try to disguise that,
or the lighting is totally off,
or like the lighting is totally off
on the lower part, and
exactly. And then I've unfortunately had the displeasure to see several people blatantly Photoshop non-surgical rhinoplasties where they're showing results that are just simply not possible.
Well, that's horrible that's being done. I mean, I think you brought up an excellent point of really focusing the efforts with the filler on the midline, because that's where we kind of have some idea of the vascular anatomy, where we know it's relatively safe. I think the dorsum is safer than the tip. I think tip vasculature is a little bit harder to predict, but I think staying deep and central on the dorsum is relatively safe. And I love the point about the low radix. That's just critical. And so I personally I like injecting the dorsum. I try to avoid injecting the tip too much, but I have patients sometimes asking me for sidewall injections for little depressions, or I mean, what do you do with the scenario of someone who's had surgery before and then they want to have filler, in like kind of a post rhinoplasty? Vasculature has changed, right? So I hesitate with those, but will you fill someone who's had rhinoplasty prior surgical?
Only very hesitantly, and only a little bit. I think the thing that we have to be most cautious on, I love what you said, stay deep, stay midline, that's safe. When injecting the tip, if you are injecting the tip and you're trying to get more and more and more projection from the tip, or more refinement from the tip, you have to stop at a certain point. If you're injecting and the next spot where you're putting your needle and you keep injecting, and filler is coming out of the skin at that point, you've gone too far. And what's probably going to happen is 3 days later, they're going to get red they're going to get little pimples coming out of their nose, and that's due to vascular compromise. It doesn't have to. What I found most interesting is, it's classically described of sort of the embolic phenomenon of when you intravascularly inject someone, you get emboli, and you get that sort of necrosis or semi-ischemic look. But it's not necessarily from embolism. It can simply be from compression.
Yes, outside.
And the thing that's most surprising to me, Gary, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've had over the years a number of patients come in the office with clear either embolic or compression ischemia that's been going on for maybe a few days to a few weeks. And it's surprising to me what the patients tell me. They tell me that their practitioners called it an allergic reaction, called it something really other than what it truly was, and sort of tried to hide it from them, which I'm very surprised to see. But I think
I had a nurse injector who did it to herself and had, an embolic type of event along the dorsum, and her reasoning for injecting herself was that before she injected her patients, she wanted to try it on herself, which on one hand, like, that's nice of her to do, but on the other, I'm like, please, like, I'm happy to do the injection for you and not charge you. Just don't do that to yourself. But it's kind of rough. So if someone comes in who's had filler clearly in their nose, will you dissolve it before doing surgery?
Great question. I love that question. Somewhat controversial question. I see a lot of people out there that say, inject vitreous or hyaluronidase in there before you do the surgery, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. For me, I don't. I actually just go in and operate on them. I find that because I do open rhinoplasty, it's very, very simple and easy to take the filler out. That's one thing I disagree with when some people say you have to dissolve it before surgery. You don't. Anyone who's ever done open rhinoplasty who's good at it will know it is so simple to take that filler out. And it's just, that's what's also shocking to me when I do these open rhinoplasties that have already had filler, the places that people are injecting the filler. When people are injecting straight into the columella, I just say, my God, like, I can't believe someone would inject straight into the columella. And the reason they're doing it, and the patients tell me, because I'll ask them after surgery, I'll say, you got a lot of your injections right into the columella right there. And they'll say, oh yeah, the person did it to lift my tip up and act as a columellar strut graft. And I just say, my God, that's so risky, so dangerous.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not worth it. Last filler question from my end, what is your material of choice when you are injecting for the nose?
Usually Juvederm. Yeah, usually Juvederm.
Okay.
I just have good, long-lasting, relatively long-lasting results with it. Yeah. So I'm sure there's better stuff out there. What do you like?
No, my preference is I don't even carry Juvederm in the practice. I only have the Restylane line. So, Lift, Restylane, L, and Silk, and I'm able to pretty much do anything I need on the face with those three. I use Lift primarily for the nose. My only issue with Juvederm, well, in fellowship, I just found that it was attracting too much water for my taste. That what I was left with at the end of the injection wasn't exactly what I found like a week later. Just for that reason, I guess I've moved away from it. But again, it's what works best in your hands, So I literally don't carry it. So I'm sure if I used it, I'd get better at it. But I've just been using Restylane.
Yeah, it's also interesting, Gary. Just one more comment on fillers. I've had patients who clearly have either an inverted V or something some other serious problem where they have a visible step off the bony cartilaginous junction. They clearly need spreader grafts or major nasal reconstruction. I've had patients tell me that they go to practitioners who offer to inject that area, and some even claim it will improve their breathing, which makes zero sense whatsoever.
Right.
And so there's just a lot of disinformation out there about what fillers can accomplish and can't accomplish in the nose, and people have to be careful.
Yeah, for sure. No, great points, Rich. Thank you. All right, so moving on to image rendering, like computer animating a face. So I was actually on the phone today with a new company. They're called Edit, AEDIT. I don't know if you've come in contact with them, but they're trying to be like a real self, and they're starting by educating patients. They have actually a lot of good content, but they're priding themselves on this app that they've created where people can basically morph their own faces, which I'm like, that's not really that new. But also I was telling them over the phone how I don't really agree with that, because I think it's bad enough sometimes when when we're wrong with our, simulation. But when patients can do it themselves and they don't really understand what's maybe surgically possible or feasible, I think that's even more dangerous, just for unrealistic expectations. So I guess with that being said, what's your approach in your practice, especially doing as many rhinoplasties as you do? Do you find that that's useful or not really?
Yeah, so I take a very different approach than a lot of people do in this, in that I don't do 3D imaging at all in my practice. I'm actually adamantly opposed to it. One of the reasons for that is that I just have a different patient population where I have patients who come from all over the world for revision rhinoplasty. And that's actually one of the most common things that they tell me, is they'll tell me that they felt like they got tricked or misled by their previous surgeon into doing the surgery based on 3D imaging. So for myself, what I tell patients is, go on someone's website, look at all their before and after pictures. If they have 5 pictures or something, they just don't do the surgery enough. I always tell my patients, if you look on my website and I told you, all those surgeries, I didn't even do any of them. I just photoshopped all the results. They wouldn't be so happy with me or want to do surgery with me, I presume. And in my practice, we actually own 3 Vectra machines.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I just don't use them at all. Some of my partners do. I just find real before and after pictures really show you what is possible with noses. And as examples of this, I'll have patients actually come in for revisions and show me the 3D image that their surgeon did for them. And one of the classic examples, at least that I know of, is nasal tip deep projections, where the surgeon has clearly in the 3D image shown a nasal tip deep projection where someone has for everyone listening, someone has a very elongated nasal tip. The surgeon will show bringing that tip in with the 3D image, and guess what? Patient didn't get a tip deep projection. The surgeon probably didn't even try a tip deep projection. Maybe didn't even know how to do it, and just sold them the surgery based on a 3D image. And it probably couldn't show them a single real before and after picture of a nasal tip deep projection. Patient got sold, did the surgery, and unfortunately didn't get the result they were looking for. The way I sort of navigate that, Gary, is that I won't use what I believe is a marketing gimmick to sell surgery in 3D imaging. I'll tell patients as we get to know each other better closer to the surgery date, if they ever want to go on Facetune or probably something like you just said and manipulate their own image and send it to me, I'll say, yeah, we can do that. Or I'll say, no, I can't do that. Here's why. I just don't want to be the one selling surgery.
Yeah, for sure. I generally will do some imaging rendering for patients. That being said, I don't think I have as much of as big of a repertoire as you do to kind of show them exactly like, look, you're coming in with this skin color, this age. Let me show you exactly like the 10 people or 50 people that I've worked on very similar to you. So that's one reason. Another one is that's just kind of how I trained, and it was we never did 3D like the more modern kind of Vectra approaches. We did use a system that also kind of expensive, whatever. I use Photoshop Fix. Keep it really simple. It's free. It's great. It's just like an app on the iPad, iPhone, and I don't do it with them there. That's the thing. I don't try to oversell surgery, just same as you. My reasoning for doing it, first of all, every move that I make when I'm at home sitting there trying to kind of Photoshop it, I'm thinking what surgical step is going to get me to have it look like that, or hopefully look like that. So that's kind of in response. I agree with you. If you're just trying to make it look good, or trying to make it look so that you can sell it to the patient, that's no good. The second thing is, I just find, and I guess just based on, again, my training, using it as a tool to get on the same page, with the patient. So understanding what it is that they want. I think when someone's coming in for like a facelift, it's kind of like everyone understands what the end goal is. End goal is you want to lift. You don't want to look like you were, lifted. You don't want the scars visible. You want the neck. It's all pretty straightforward and obvious. I think with the nose, there's a lot of like these little points that some people want to keep a little bit of their hump. Some people, so there's all these different things. And I think too often, for people who maybe don't take the approach that you do to really listen to your patients and hear them out and just tell them like, look, trust me, based on all this work, I can make this happen for you and it's going to be great. The old school kind of approach, like the paternalistic approach of like, I know it's best for you. Everyone's going to look like this type of nose. Those weren't good times. And so I guess to move away from that, at least my mentor would do kind of some degree of imaging, and I've maintained that. And it's really just to say that, is this what you want? Will this make you happy? And I've actually been surprised by like the changes I've sometimes made that are very realistic, where people are like, no, I want it smaller, I want it, you know, thinner. And I'm like, I don't think that's possible. So in those cases, I'm glad that I did the imaging, you know, because then I don't think I could make them happy. So I think it's, first of all, knowing what you can do surgically, and also trying to kind of make sure that that's what, you know, what they're looking for. That's how I see it. But again, like it, you know, what you do works great. So
Yeah,
awesome.
I love what you said about all that. And I think it's just important when, if you're going to do the imaging, to be, number one, an honest
Yeah.
person like you are, and just really use it as a tool to find out what patients want and not to sell surgery.
Yes.
Which it's
That's
just
a critical point. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just, I've just seen it go wrong so many
And a lot
times.
of the apps that are being made today, first of all, they're just, you know, basically just knockoffs of Photoshop, because Photoshop really is the, you know, the original. And any app of Photoshop is a million times better than any of these like knockoffs that they sell for a lot of money. And they're just making it so that it's easier to show these changes that I feel like people want to see, right? So you can toggle the width of the nose really easily. Great, but that doesn't mean that you can get it to as narrow as they allow you in the app to do. So those are all kind of issues I have with the more modern, you know, apps that they're just trying to sell.
Yeah, exactly. I had, a number of years ago, a company approach me to try to sell me these ridiculous, like 3D statue like noses that there were these renderings of these faces, and they would come on these like little plaques that you could display in your office.
Right.
And so they approached me to buy 10 like noses. It was so ridiculous. And they said, you can display these in your office and show them to patients, and patients will, you know, you'll be able to say, you can have this nose or that nose or this nose. And then patients will book surgery with you because of that. I said, okay, that just sounds ridiculous to me, but there's a major problem here, guys. These aren't my I didn't operate on a single one of these patients. Why would I show a patient this? They're not my patients. I didn't even operate on them. And they didn't seem to see a problem with that at all. There's some weird stuff out there.
Yeah. I think in the field that we're in, there are a lot of folks who are doing it for maybe not always the best reasons, you know, unfortunately. And so it's, yeah, and patients, it's hard for them to always, you know, find the right person. From their perspective, it's like, how do you pick a good doctor? They don't always know, you know, sometimes what they see, you know, on TV or on Instagram, sometimes those really big accounts, they think, oh, well, he's got, you know, 400,000 followers, he must be the best. And it's easy to get lost in that. So I kind of almost feel bad, you know, for the patient, because how can they decide? You know, or you ask your friend, and then maybe your friend had a good experience, but doesn't mean you will. So it's challenging.
I know we have a lot of rhinoplasty talk to go over, but I think you just brought up such an interesting topic in plastic surgery on Instagram, which is the person with 400,000 followers, or the people with 400,000 followers. Sure. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that surgeons are willing to buy followers, buy comments, buy likes.
Yeah, that doesn't happen organically. I just hope that people understand. Unless you're maybe the head guy on Botched, I'll give him that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple people out there, but for the most part, they clearly bought followers. Yeah. You know, I look at my own Instagram account. I only have like, I don't know, 8,500 followers, but I am so crazy busy with DMs and inquiries and all sorts of stuff. If I had 400,000 followers or 1 million followers, I mean, are you kidding me?
You'd need to clone yourself times 10 to handle that. You know?
So it's just interesting. I mean, I think you have to be honest and true, you know, to your patients, and it's a form of deception, unfortunately, that people go out there and buy all these followers. I know some people that have, you know, that 200,000 follower. They've told me straight up. They told me they purchased it, and it's surprisingly cheap. It's unbelievable. It's like I think once you can buy them for like $20.
Right. I mean, assuming Instagram doesn't catch on, I guess, and block the account or whatever. But also, I think like, you know, human psychology, after you reach like a critical number, I don't know what that is. It's probably different for each person, but maybe it's 20,000, maybe it's 50,000. But like, if someone gets, you know, followed by an account that's 50,000, or they just come, you know, across it, they're probably more likely to follow it than maybe an account like ours, which is not as impressive number-wise, because it's just like, oh wow, they have so many followers, they must be good or they must be popular or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues with that. Open versus closed rhinoplasty. So I know you
I
mentioned you do mostly open. I do
yeah.
as well. So
Yeah,
I
I
want
mean,
to hear your
I
thoughts.
will say, not to disrespect anyone out there doing closed. I do pretty much all mine open. I love open rhinoplasty. For me, it gives better exposure to the patient. The nasal anatomy, I can do a lot functionally open as well. A ton of cartilage grafts that I don't think you can put in closed. I pretty much do, for even primaries, I do 6 grafts for every case. I do bilateral spreaders. I
Mm.
do bilateral alar contours to help prevent alar retraction. I love alar contour grafts. It's my favorite thing I do in everyone now. And I do a COLUMELLAR strut, and then I'll do a soft tip graft. Usually lower lateral cartilage, crushed up even sometimes, but very soft tip grafts. So I love open for those reasons. I have found, at least in doing all the revisions I do, because probably about half my practice is revisions at this point.
Okay.
I find that closed has a very high chance of tip droop after surgery. So that's why I personally love open. And the biggest thing about open rhinoplasty, it really doesn't leave a scar, as you know too.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you do it the right way, it will not leave a scar. So there's no advantage of closed rhinoplasty in terms of a scar, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the close is sold as like a scarless procedure. But if the scar from the open really isn't an issue, then why do
Yeah,
the
yeah,
scar stuff?
yeah, exactly. I think people use it as a tool to sell surgery, calling it
Yeah.
scarless in terms of the closed approach. If you're going to say something like this, I'm going to make fun of you. That's just my personality. So there's someone on Instagram out there, I won't call him out by name,
Right.
but who claims like to be the master of closed rhinoplasty. No one that's that well known on Instagram. A couple of us just make fun of him all the time because he actually put this on his Instagram. It was it was like a mediocre to bad result.
Yeah.
And on his Instagram, it literally said, Dr. So-and-so is the only plastic surgeon in the entire world who could achieve a result like this.
And it wasn't a good result.
No, it was like a mediocre to bad result.
Yeah.
But that's like his whole account is like saying all these ridiculous comments like that. It's just going to give you a bad name.
I don't think that that's a way to grow a sustainable practice. I find that people who, I mean, there's a way to keep the practice going if you do crazy things like that and things that just aren't good. If you keep throwing money at it, but eventually it's just not a good sustainable solution. I mean, like you got to keep taking out loans to support, bad habits.
Yeah, and you want to be, humble and understanding and not, and I want to know that if I send you a patient, for instance, which I love to do, because every patient I ever send you, by the way, loves you to death. So you have a great bedside manner. Everyone loves you. And you just sort of want to be able to trust people. And when I send a patient to you, I know they're going to be well cared for. I know they're going to get good quality surgery. And that's what you look for. You don't want someone saying, "I, Dr. Gary Linkov, am the best surgeon in the entire world." When you send someone a patient. So.
I think people have a skewed sense of competition. I mean, I think especially in a city that like we're in, it's like a Venn diagram. There's some degree of overlap between procedures that people do, but then there's almost always something somewhat unique that someone's doing that other people aren't, or a combination of skills or whatever it might be, or else they probably wouldn't want to start a practice in a very competitive city if you're just like kind of like everyone else or what. I just wish people didn't really always see it as just like, oh my god, I have to be the best. Like, you can continue to grow your thing and help other people grow theirs. I mean, that's how I've approached it, and I think it's a healthier mentality.
Totally agree with you, Gary. I have to address one question that I see that one of my residents, one of my chief residents actually just asked us. Ahmed Nasser just said, "What's your advice for graduating residents about common pitfalls and the early learning curve with open rhinoplasty?" What would you say to that?
That's a good question. I did see that pop up. I'm glad we're addressing it. I think the number one thing in the beginning is kind of getting comfortable opening the nose. I mean, it seems we talk about it in passing, like, oh, open rhinoplasty, but getting the nose open safely and efficiently, I think is challenging. And I think I was fortunate in my training to have seen it done different ways, doing the COLUMELLAR incision first versus doing the marginal incision first. And so I kind of combine those two, and I use both of them to my advantage, in different patients, depending on what the case might be. If there's a lot of scarring, by where the marginal incision would go, then, I'd go COLUMELLAR first or vice versa. So it just kind of depends. But I think having seen it done in both ways, I think it's really helpful. I think it's just kind of getting used to opening the nose. I mean, it's very stressful in the beginning when you're like, oh my God, like, if it takes me so long to open it and then I still have to like do the procedure and put all those cartilage grafts in, it could be sort of overwhelming. So I think the learning curve, a lot of it comes from that just in the beginning. And then of course you have to figure out, first of all, what are you trying to even achieve? Like having the right aesthetic goal in mind or the right functional goal. And then doing the right steps to get there. And the more, we learn about this, the more we read about it, the more lectures we watch, and the more we actually do it, it's like you're constantly going back to the drawing board. And, you said like you have like your like 6 grafts that you do now, but it probably took you many, many cases to get to like, these are the, and I'm sure there are times when you need an extra graft or maybe you don't need a graft. And so deciding on how the exact combination of steps and moves are going to be in a rhinoplasty can be, very challenging. And I don't know if you ever get to the point of truly, like actually in Dean Toriumi's book, who's considered, one of the leaders in the rhinoplasty world right now, in his like latest book, he talks about how he started off in his career early on thinking that he really would become like this master rhinoplasty surgeon, that he could handle any case and he could just predict everything. And he's like, that's just not true. You can't ever truly master it. I mean, it's a humbling procedure, probably one of the most challenging in all of plastic surgery. I deal with the face, but I mean, what's your kind of take on that? Challenge
I love one thing I love a lot that you just said, but one thing that you just said was, which is a lot of patients ask me this, because I'll get patients who've had 7 or 8 rhinoplasties when they come in to see me, not infrequently. I mean, like usually a couple times a week. Some of the cases I'm doing are 7 or 8x rhinoplasty revisions. And then I'll do primaries too, probably half primaries, half revisions at this point is what I'm doing. That's something that a lot of patients ask me. They say, is my nose going to be hard? Is my nose considered challenging? Or is my nose easy? My nose is probably easy. As many as I do, I tell every patient, I don't consider anyone easy or hard. Because once you get in there and you get lazy or you just want to do something fast, or you say, oh God, I have an hour to do this case because I had patients come in or something, that's where you run into trouble. And so I treat, you have to treat every single case like it's a hard case, like it's because it's someone's nose, it's someone's life on the line that they've been waiting their entire life for this surgery. So many of my patients come in and they say, I've been wanting this ever since I was X age, and this means everything to me. And you just have to take that responsibility very seriously. One of the best things that I do in my practice, just going back to Ahmed's question, is training residents and fellows. It's truly one of my biggest joys in rhinoplasty practice. It's just so interesting when we go in for some of these crazy revision cases that I do. And you're opening the nose, and the residents and the fellows are always telling me, you get complete. It looks like nothing. Like they don't recognize any anatomy at all. And then by the time that we're finally done all the at least exposure and dissection, you can actually see what's going on a lot of times. And so it's just been great to have that experience in teaching residents and fellows. And I do tell my patients, I do have residents and fellows in almost every single one of my cases. I am the one doing the surgery. So that at the end of the day, no one has to worry about that.
I saw someone commenting about eyebrows. So in case people are wondering about me, I have advanced alopecia areata. So that's something I'll be talking about more in the coming probably weeks, but that's why you're not seeing much in the way of eyebrows. So, but no, really good points. I mean, I think teaching is super important. I really haven't had the opportunity yet in my practice to incorporate that in. I'm expecting to, do that, once things really kind of are full speed. Yeah, because I love to teach as well, but it's great to be able to do that.
Well, it's so fun, Gary. I tell my residents that where I trained, which was an amazing place to train, we will literally do more rhinoplasties in a single week now when my residents get to do with me than I did in all 6 years of plastic surgery.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's really fun for the residents and fun for me. So.
Yeah, so in terms of the learning curve, I mean, I think it's steep, for rhinoplasty in general. And then once you get into the revision category, it's tough. I mean, because you don't have the material that you're used to working with. And I guess that gets into, that's somewhere on our list, right? Kind of sourcing the materials. So, Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people know that, a lot of our grafts are coming from the nose. So we use, portions of the nose to rebuild the nose. But then when you don't have that cartilage, like you said, seventh time revision, where is your next kind of source and where's the one after that?
Yeah, so I do, for all primaries, I get septal cartilage. That's the first thing I do in the case. I
Yeah.
harvest septal cartilage and I'll carve all the grafts from that. Like I said,
Yeah.
bilateral spreaders, bilateral alar contours, COLUMELLAR strut, soft tip graft for every single patient. Soft tip graft coming from LLC, lower lateral cartilage, for every patient. So in revisions, I don't take any chances. I don't get operative reports from previous surgeons. I find them pretty worthless, to be honest with you. To be frank, I find them not accurate, or they're blatant lies, or when you're getting into 9x revisions on patients, you're not going to really get much out of previous operative notes. So what I do for every patient is I use MTF cartilage, irradiated cadaveric rib cartilage, for anyone out there, which I talk about a lot on my Instagram, and it's a great product. I've used it, gosh, in hundreds and hundreds of patients at this point, over many years, and it works really well. I've never personally ever had a problem with absorption, infection, or warping from it.
That's great.
It has a steep learning curve, though. So for any surgeons who are on this board, some people say it warps. It does not warp if you know how to use it right. Basically, when it comes out of the package, it comes as a completely straight line. Okay, it's totally straight. So it comes frozen. It's totally straight. If you put it in the nose immediately, okay, it's going to warp. You just have to know how to use the product. So what I do with MTF cartilage is I let it thaw for about an hour. It warps at the end. I can't really do it with my finger that well, to be honest with you, but the end pretty much warps. You cut off the side, you cut off the piece that warps, and you have perfectly straight piece of cartilage. I've gone in for revisions on patients with this, and it's still there 3-4 years down the road. I've done some crazy cases in patients who've had numerous revisions, and not the current MTF, but older versions of similar, cadaveric rib has been around for like 20 years. I've seen it in patients, and it's totally
Wow.
So
do you ever put any screws in to secure, like if it's a complete L strut, or never?
No. I do all sutures, and I'll do some really wild stuff in some of these crazy revisions where we'll have a complete L strut. I'll do extended alar contour grafts all the way up to the COLUMELLAR strut to reconstruct the whole nose in patients that have had like horrible things happen to them, saddle nose deformities, total nasal collapse, and just really bad problems that it can fix very well. Best advice out there for anyone trying to use MTF: come work with someone who's used it a lot. Anyone's welcome to come do cases with me, of course, or other people out there. Rod Rourke uses it a lot. Other surgeons do as well. And if you're doing a mega revision that I often do, or just not like a regular revision or a tertiary or something like that, just like a mega revision that is a really bad situation for the poor patient, I'll order 2 sheets of MTF for those cases.
What's the cost of one sheet?
The one I use, it's a medium sheet, and it's really interesting. So you'd figure like a piece of cartilage like that's been irradiated and processed and stuff would be like $25,000 just for the cartilage. MTF Biologics, nonprofit, so they don't overcharge for it. It's amazing. So a medium sheet of MTF is $719, and
Pretty
so
reasonable.
it's very reasonable for the patient to pay for. And then if you're getting it done through insurance, if you have a deviated septum, breathing problems, and you need cartilage, all insurances will pay for it except United Healthcare. They don't pay for it, but otherwise other insurance programs will pay for it. So.
Yeah, no, good to know. On the topic of, like you mentioned, saddle nose deformity, or someone who has an incredibly kind of scooped nose, or some other kind of traumatic event there. For dorsal augmentation, I know this is a kind of a hot topic at conferences and the like. So what's your kind of preferred method? Let's say you're using MTF, but I mean, what do you do with it for the dorsum?
Here's what I would tell you. At least in my experience, I try to avoid dorsal augmentation if I can. It's high risk of complications, dorsal augmentation is. What are the risks of dorsal augmentation? Malposition is the biggest risk. You have to be very careful. Now, what I've done in some patients is, especially if they have thick skin, you can really do well with dorsal augmentation, which are most patients who want, like, let's just get saddle nose out of the way, because that's a whole other topic. Right. But let's just say someone wants a little dorsal augmentation and they have thick dorsal skin. You can actually tunnel a very precision tunnel up the dorsum, because you're not rasping it down. You're not having to do it.
Right.
You put spreader grafts. You're not rasping it and creating that wide undermining like you normally would. So if you create a very, very focal tunnel, you can actually put a long piece of MTF cartilage up there. And as long as it's thick skin, it works incredibly well. I've just had such great results doing that. Now, what do you do in the thin skin patient? Usually thin skin patients aren't really getting dorsal augmentation, to be honest with you. But if they were, you just have to be very cautious. I've done diced cartilage wrapped in fat and temporal fascia before. I like it, but it tends to resorb a little too much for my taste. So I try to avoid it if possible. But if you have to, you have to.
But for like Asian or African American nose, where they're looking for that projection.
That's what I'm talking about. And usually in Asian and African American noses, the dorsal skin is thicker than the Asian nose. So
you slide in like a solid MTF piece in a tight pocket.
Yeah, I've done some amazing thicker skinned Asian African American dorsal augmentation. It works really well for those. The patient you'd want to avoid at all costs is a thin skin Caucasian patient.
Makes sense. Dorsal. Someone asked here, does MTF have a risk of warping after surgery? I think maybe she kind of didn't catch it early on.
Yeah,
so you want to reiterate.
So MTF, as we were talking, it comes as a perfectly straight frozen piece. You have to let it thaw for an hour before surgery. It will warp some towards the end or other ways, and you just cut it so it doesn't warp. It's a really, really good way to use MTF. It will not warp as long as you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, it's your first time using it, it's gonna warp. It's gonna be a disaster. That's what I've talked to some other surgeons who said, oh yeah, I used MTF, I didn't really like it that much. And I'll say, oh, did you let it thaw before you put it in? They said, no, there's no reason to. It's perfectly straight. And I said, oh God, no wonder I have problems with it.
Yeah, I mean, even autologous rib, which, I don't do a ton of. I'm assuming, if you were using MTF, you probably also aren't doing a lot of autologous rib.
Exactly.
Yeah, but autologous rib also, I mean, you have to give it time to fully kind of warp before you start carving it and doing different things to it. So I mean, I think it's somewhat similar in some ways, but of course, if it's coming frozen, as a piece that's straight, then you have to give it, I think, even more time than autologous. So that makes sense. In terms of tip swelling after surgery, people expect their results right when the cast gets removed, but as we all know, that's not always, when you see the final result. And we always tell people it could take up to a year, but, people get discouraged, they get frustrated. So just want to know kind of your protocol for managing that.
It's all about communication for me. I tell patients a million times before surgery, after surgery, way after surgery, that it's just going to take time for the tip to come down. It is truly a year-long process. And you just have to be open and honest with patients about that. So what I usually tell patients is I'll take the splint off a week after surgery. A week after surgery, you can go back to the gym. You can go back to work. You can do whatever you want. If you have a little residual bruising under your eyes, you can cover up with a little makeup. But otherwise, you're free to go about your normal life. It's not going to be your perfect final result by then, but it's good enough to get you back out in public and feeling confident again. It does take a full year to get to that way. And patients are great. I mean, if you tell them something enough times and you're very honest and open about it, and they have a very good understanding about what to expect going into surgery, I think they're very understanding about that.
Do you offer them steroid injections?
Yes, definitely. Steroid injections work great for the dorsum and the supratip. I never inject the tip itself, but dorsum supratip works amazingly well. I wanted to. So someone asked a great question there about
COVID.
How will COVID affect the way you do rhinoplasties? I think it's something that's on all of our minds, of course. Patient safety and staff safety is our number one priority at all times. So when we're back up and running, which is another topic we're going to address because a lot of people have been asking about that. We'll get to that next. But when we're back up and running, we're going to be doing testing on every patient that comes into the operating room in accordance with our sort of state guidelines. So we're definitely going to be doing testing within 24 hours of surgery to make sure that that patients aren't carrying it into the operating room. We're testing our staff as well. It's really going to be the main focus on safety when we return to the OR. That's like the hot topic of conversation right now. And I don't mind it at all, but usually about like 20 to 30 times a day I'm asked when we're going to be reopening. And so it's great. We have friends all around the country who are starting to operate again this week, which I'm very happy to hear. Things are going well in other places. New York is getting much better. I can tell you from a lot of friends in hospitals, ICU admissions are down, intubations are down, vented patients are down. Everything's looking a lot better. So when we're going to open, totally is dependent on how everyone's doing, how our local hospitals are doing in terms of their capacities right now, and that'll definitely come from a mandate from Governor Cuomo. Most of us think it's going to be around mid-May.
I think the earliest he said it was going to be May 15th. So
yeah,
hopefully,
I think it's looking like it's going to be around then. Other counties in New York can start operating now, actually, electively. It's just New York City, Nassau County, the harder hit counties can't. But we're confident that we're going to come back. We're going to come back strong and safe. Most importantly, I think it's going to be really great for everyone.
So will you be doing anything extra in terms of PPE for yourself and, for the people who are scrubbing in? Because, as we know, the nose can carry, a lot of this contagion. And even with a negative test, there are false negatives out there.
Yeah.
And so, will you do anything extra? Because I've heard of some people on some boards saying that they want to wear full PAPR, full-on suits and everything. I mean, I think that's a bit extreme, but I think that's
a bit extreme. I think using appropriate PPE is going to be critical. Leaving giant suits and whatnot for hospital-treated ICUs is more important at this point. I think everyone's has the right focus in mind on patient safety, which is.
What about when you're seeing patients in the office? I mean, I've been thinking about this, just as early as just a few hours ago. What's the best way to protect patients, protect ourselves, without making it kind of uncomfortable for people? I mean, especially in the kind of aesthetic world that we live in. I mean, patients wearing masks is a little bit strange if they're coming in for their face to be assessed. For us, should we wear masks, or is that going to make patients uncomfortable?
I think masks are great. I think everyone should wear them, quite honestly, for now at least. And I'll tell you my strategy and the way I'm running my practice is I'm doing all virtuals right now, 6 days a week, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. pretty much nonstop. It's crazy how busy it is. When we do get back in the operating room, I'm pretty much only going to be operating. I'm not going to be seeing patients as far as new consults in the office. That's why I tell everyone, definitely take advantage of this time right now to do virtuals, because when we do get back to work, it's going to be crazy busy for patients getting surgery, because we have to honor those patients who we've promised surgery to and had to delay it due to this. So I'm pretty much going to be operating nonstop and not doing too many new consults at that point. But we'll probably still keep. I mean, I've been doing virtuals for years and years and years, virtual consults, and love doing it. We get a lot of international patients doing it. So
awesome.
Definitely will continue on with that as well.
So someone had asked, Rich, just because as we're kind of getting to the last 5 minutes here, if someone's wanting a thinner nose but not the downtime of full rhinoplasty, would you recommend alar reduction? Are most patients happy with those results?
Good question. I'm going to answer it very quickly. No. Do not substitute anything, in my opinion, for a full rhinoplasty. I see so many patients out there who tell me they just wanted a quick surgery with little downtime, and their surgeon was doing it under local anesthesia. Guess what? Probably 99% of those cases are going to end up needing a revision. So I would say a definite no to that one. But patients ask about it a lot, and some surgeons will do anything to take your money. So there will be a lot of people out there that will gladly do it for you and take your money. But money's probably better spent in charity at that point. And then what's this say? Do you normally use nasal grafts in septoplasty? How does that affect the overall look and function of the nose? My personal philosophy is I won't ever just do a septoplasty. For me, I know it's not going to work that well, honestly. It's not going to help the breathing alone doing a septoplasty. I always do spreader grafts in that situation where someone has impaired breathing and a deviated septum. In my humble opinion, you have to use spreader grafts too, where the breathing doesn't get better.
Yeah, I've found that especially with like caudal septal deflection, an open septoplasty is really the way to go, and you oftentimes need to really rebuild the front of the septum, the caudal portion, bottom front portion of it, you need to give it some structure. You know, in a lot of these patients, it's very, even the ones that aren't exactly like deviated caudally, but they just have almost just like a flattened nose, you know, there's just no support there. For septoplasty, I really look for unilateral obstruction. It's almost impossible for them to have true, you know, like bilateral obstruction from a deviated septum. It's, you know, if it's severe enough, it's usually one side. And then for my bilateral obstruction patients, it's oftentimes that their tip is just kind of flattened against their face. So I'm doing an open septoplasty, a lot of times taking a PDS kind of scaffolding kind of template and attaching cartilage to that and really building up the front of the nose. And then once it's nice and stable and away from their face, I find that their breathing is so much better. So at the VA, for example, I'm doing a lot of those cases, and they, you know, they do great, and they don't really care how they look. I mean, I think they look better, but their focus is just like, you know, how do I breathe better?
Someone got to a hot topic with this question they just asked, which the COLUMELLAR strut graft versus septal extension graft.
Oh yeah, we had that on our list.
Yeah, we couldn't get through everything. So tell me your thoughts on that versus tongue and groove versus.
Well, you know, I mean, I didn't train with much like just straight COLUMELLAR strut. And I guess there's concern from, like, you know, some like Toriumi or whatever, some surgeons that over time there could be some droop because you're not attaching it to like the main septum. So I tend to do tongue and groove if there's enough projection of the septum. If the septum is sort of recessed too much, then I use an extension graft to get it to the point where I can do essentially a tongue and groove, even though it's a septal extension graft. So that's the way I do it. I think one of the downsides is that you create a stiffer tip. And so that's, you know, a concern for some patients. Like if they're kissing, they feel like, you know, my tip is so hard. So I think a COLUMELLAR strut is a more maybe natural feel, but potentially over time, there could be a little bit of droop. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I love COLUMELLAR strut grafts. That's how I do it. But your points are well taken, of course. I have such a bad perspective on tongue and groove. No offense to anyone out there, but just because I do a lot of revision, and probably just a manifestation, probably just a, you know, capture bias that I do so many revisions, and I see a lot of tongue and grooves that have over-rotated or exposed nostrils through alar retraction due to some of the stuff, or asymmetries, or, as you said, too hard. But I think the whole point to that is there's plus and minuses to every technique, and you never want to try to dictate what your surgeon does. You know, let your surgeon sort of do the technique that they're most comfortable with. If you get good results, that those speak for themselves.
Time is almost out. So, yes. Dr. Richard Reisch, how do people get in touch with you if they want to book an appointment? And
I would just say Instagram. Yeah, that's
okay.
I'm very open to messaging, and I tend to get in touch with patients pretty quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this with me. It's really fun, and I think people learned a lot about it. I'll capture the video and store it, and then we'll reshare it through like IGTV and other ways, so people can hear it again. So thanks again.
Gary,
look forward to seeing you soon.
I can't wait. That was so much fun. Thanks so much for having me, Gary.
Okay, sounds good. I'll see you, Rich.
All right, bye.
Bye.